I never felt safe. My father didn't always live with us. My mother and father would argue, and he would go, but then he would come back, and sometimes unexpected, and there would be a lot of tension and a lot of trauma and a lot of violence, and he would abuse my mother and myself mainly. The lights would shine through the window coming down the driveway above the television, and I would see the lights, and as soon as I see the lights I knew he was home, and I'd be that terrified I'd wet myself sometimes. And he would do things like wake me up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and ask to see my school shoes, and if my school shoes weren't clean enough he'd hit me over the head with the shoe a few times and then get me out in the laundry, and while he was demanding my mother to get his dinner and me clean my shoes. So there was lots of stuff like that. He was, and it wasn't always about the physical stuff. It was sometimes the look. And he would look at me and I would get scared. My mother had me when she was 15.
Right.
So that's back in 1955. There was no real help. And so sometimes we'd live at my father's parents' place in Leichhardt, and my father would come home drunk, and his mother was also an alcoholic, and she'd be drunk, and so they would get very elevated and things would get broken, and if I was in my high chair crying, he would throw me out of the high chair and tell me to shut up, and so my mother would get me and put me in a pram, and we'd go off to the park in Mackenzie Street and we'd sleep there. And my mother, she did the best she could, I understand now, but there was little things that would happen even, when my father wasn't there, but my mother, once I remember breaking a vase and, she went off her head and, she slapped me around the face a few times. And so messages I got out of that was that the vase was more important than me, that I didn't matter.
Kids tend to believe their parents because it's like all
we've got no else, and I always, in the housing area where I grew up, so I would see some families that had a different unit than us, and I used to fantasize about being a part of their family. There was one family that stood out that, the dad was a bricklayer and the mum was at home and cooking and it was just a happy house,
What did it feel like walking in there?
Safe. Yep. Safe, and they took interest in me. So I guess when I reflect back on it now, I was hungry for that and I wanted more. So I remember I was early teens, maybe just 13, and I think was with a group of boys that were a bit older than me, and they were smoking pot, and they said, "Oh, you've smoked before, haven't you?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And I hadn't, because I always wanted, because I didn't feel like I fitted in at home. I needed to fit in somewhere, and then that for me progressed because I obviously kept hanging out with those boys, and things started to progress into more crime, and then started to be heavier drugs. And then for me, I feel like I was probably before the heavy drugs, but I was a lost soul. As I progressed and got older, and you kept using more drugs and crime, and I just developed this toolkit, these strategies of how to survive. And I know it wasn't how most people survived, but it was how I survived and protected myself, because I still felt unloved, uncared for. Heroin for me, when I first started using heroin, it was like it took all that stuff away. I just felt at ease for a while with me, and so I wanted that daily. I wanted to get away from the pain that I grew up with, and I wanted to experience that feeling daily, and that created its own problem. Because the more obviously I used of that, the more crime I had to commit, the more people you hurt. and that went on for some time, a long time actually. There was a few things happened this particular day. So I got on the train because I was staying at my sister's place, and I had to change at Granville to get to Westmead. And I saw a mate of mine on the platform, and he was going to get some heroin, and he said, "Do you want to come?" And normally I would have gone because I was crook, sick, and I said no. And so I continued on to the detox, and I stayed there for nearly 3 weeks. And in that time, they introduced me to a community where other people were like me that had stopped using. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that. I didn't know it was possible for people like me not to use substances, and heroin in particular. And so I became a part of that community, and since then, what happened for me, I think maybe not the first time I went along to that community, but very soon after, people displayed to me that I did matter in life, and they cared about me, and they took an interest. And again, like the heroin, I was hungry for that, and I wanted more of it, and I wanted to be a part of that. And so, and I identified with some of those folk, and they identified with me, and we developed some bonds. And it was the first time in my life that I guess the pieces started to fall into place for me. And so, and I guess since that time, I've been fortunate to learn in life from all sorts of people. And what I've been able to learn is what not to do, and what I should be able and could, and what was possible to do. When I was a young bloke, I never believed in myself, and never believed that it was possible to do the things that I'm able to do today. Fundamental stuff that I guess other kids get to learn when they're young, and have a family that encourage and teach them to do that. I didn't know.
So what sort of stuff?
How to be a decent person, how to care about people, how to take interest in others, how, one of the things that had helped me was I didn't actually have to act on everything I thought. I was a very impulsive person when I was young. I would never stop and think about anything. I never thought about consequences. I never actually, a lot of words I've come to hear and understand as I've got older, I never actually heard when I was younger. Rationalisation. I didn't know what I bought a dictionary to try and understand what a lot of the words that they actually meant, because I didn't grow up with those words.
And did you get prosecuted for crimes?
Yep. Robberies that I committed. I started getting in trouble with the police for assault when I was young. As time progressed, the crimes progressed. And the crimes got heavier and more violent.
Right.
There's times when I think about some of the things that we did or I did, it upsets me.
And did you go to prison?
Yeah, I went to prison a couple of times. Fortunately, when I went to Parramatta prison the first time, there was people there that I knew.
What would be your sense now, looking back, on how much of the prison population had stories like your own?
When I think about the prison population, I think I couldn't give an accurate stat, but I think that a high percentage of people there for drug and alcohol related offences. And when I say that, armed robberies, a lot to do with drug related offences. Break and enters are mostly due to drug related offences. Assaults, domestic violence. There's a lot of people in prison as a result of alcohol and drug offences and violence, which for me connect. And I got to know quite a few people from prison, and one of the common denominators that I can look at now was that we all come from broken families. Yeah, we all seem to be a little lost in life, and quite a few still are.